The emergence of COVID-19 has forced the legal industry to rapidly undergo a fundamental transformation. I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented situation. Today, I'm speaking with media and tech lawyer Bob Ambrogi, creator of the LawSites blog and one of the most respected names in the legal technology world. Bob, I often refer to you as the Walt Mossberg of legal, which I hope you take as the highest praise. It's great to see you and welcome to the show.
It's great. It's very high praise, although a lot of people don't even know who Walt Mossberg is anymore. So I don't know if that just means you're also calling me old, but that's okay. I'll take
Well,
it.
maybe that makes me old too, but for those that don't know, Walt Mossberg was the Wall Street Journal's tech editor and kind of the journalist of record for the tech industry for years and years. And I think you certainly play that role in legal tech, Bob, and it's an honor to have you on the show. And to start our interview off, it's a pleasure to have you on this side of the microphone, or that side of the microphone for a change. We've done, many interviews over the years, but it's great to be
interviewing you.
I'm
not so comfortable on this side of the microphone. I'd rather be asking the questions and answering the questions.
It's a lot easier, I'll tell you. I've been enjoying it. So, Bob, first and foremost, tell me, how are you and your family doing?
We're doing well. It's kind of funny because in a lot of ways, this is business as usual for us. I know you've met one of my sons. I mean, my sons are both grown and out of the house, so I don't have little kids scrambling into my office while I'm working. So it's just my wife and I, and we both pretty much work out of the house or I'm actually in my office right now, which is like 3 miles from my house. So it's not a big disruption of my routine. We're doing well.
That's great. And tell us a little bit more about where you're situated and how COVID-19 has been impacting your neck of the woods.
Well, I am in Massachusetts. I live north of Boston in a little town called Rockport, which is a little seaport town. Massachusetts has 2 capes. Everybody knows Cape Cod, or a lot of people know Cape Cod, but we live on Cape Ann, which is a cape north of Boston, and it's where most people know it for The Perfect Storm, the movie The Perfect Storm. Perfect Storm all took place here. And I'm really only about 10 to 15 miles from Jared Correa, who I know was on your show just recently.
Yeah, that's right. I think his episode aired on Monday.
Yeah.
And what has I've never been to Rockport, but it looks like an idyllic little town. Your photos on Instagram are always beautiful. And maybe this is a different kind of perfect storm. What has the COVID-19 crisis done to Rockport?
It hasn't hit Rockport too badly. It's hit Massachusetts badly. I mean, Massachusetts is one of the hardest hit spots in the country, and the Boston area in particular. I don't know the numbers right now, but we're still continuing to see a surge of cases here. We're not past that yet. But the little town that I'm in is really not too bad. We've had a few cases. It's funny. I'm joking. I wasn't joking necessarily, but I don't know if you are old enough to know who Tom Rush is, who's a folk singer from the 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah, I've heard of Tom.
A well-known guy back in the day, and he still performs. He still tours. And because of this crisis, I learned that he lives in my town because I was reading an article in a newspaper about the fact that Tom Rush came down with COVID-19. And it said he's recuperating at home in his house in Rockport, Massachusetts. So Tom Rush is apparently my neighbor.
Well, you can keep an eye out for a celebrity when this is all behind us.
Right. That's about as we get here. But that's
and what has this crisis left on your mind primarily, Bob? What do you find yourself thinking about the most?
Oh God, what are we all thinking about? I mean, I think so much about just, of course, the safety of my family. As I just mentioned, my 2 kids don't live with me, and in some ways that makes it more stressful. When your kids are even when your kids are adult, you still worry about them. And so I think a lot about my kids. One of my sons is in San Francisco, which has also been a hot spot. The other one's in
Yes.
Washington, D.C., which is another hot spot. And so I think about them. But I think about all the people who are being impacted by this in so many ways. And it's a difficult time. And I tend to worry about a lot of people and think about them a lot. And that, that occupies my mind. But it's also funny, I think, in that people keep using the phrase new normal, and I hate that phrase, but you do start to fall into a routine of life as usual. You get up and you drink coffee and you check your email and whatever. And as weird as everything is, you fall into a routine of normalcy that sometimes I have to stop and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't normal at all.
Yeah, it's I've found myself falling into exactly that new normal, and just once in a while stepping back from it and realizing this is really strange. But
Yeah.
it's not a persistent feeling anymore. It's one that you kind of occasionally are aware of through the day-to-day. Bob, you've got a unique vantage point in terms of your ability to observe the macro trends in the industry, as well as the specific impacts on legal tech. What have you seen the biggest impacts of the coronavirus crisis to be to this point?
I think the biggest impact is that suddenly technology is something that we're all recognizing the value of. I thought, I don't know if you know the UK writer Joanna Goodman, but I thought
Yep.
she really put it well in an article that she wrote this week. I mean, we've all been talking about the fact that, and I've heard you say this as well, that the future has suddenly arrived. I mean,
Right.
We've all been preparing for a future that we've envisioned to be 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. And I think a lot of law firms have thought about their adoption of technology as something that, we're going to get to that at some point. We're moving in that direction, but there's no big hurry about it. And this has brought the future here very suddenly. This has forced us to be thinking about how we use technology very suddenly. But even more than that, and the point that Joanna made that I thought was really insightful, is that a lot of lawyers still harbor this mindset around technology, that technology is a threat to them, that technology is something to be feared. They have this vision of artificial intelligence taking away their work, of efficiencies driven by technology cutting into their billable hours and their business model. That's not universal, of course, but there are a lot of attorneys who still have harbored that kind of fear, that kind of just resistance to it.
This is something to stave off as long as you can.
To stave off. And so I think probably the most dramatic change in the short term here is that suddenly the attorneys who saw technology as something to fear now understand it to be a lifeline, now understand it to be something that is going to keep their practices afloat, enable them to continue to serve their clients, enable them to continue to stay in business and make a living. I've just been amazed. I was on a Zoom conference call yesterday with a group of lawyers, about 30 lawyers for a meeting. And for a number of the lawyers on the call, they had never been on a Zoom call before.
Right.
I mean, what cave have you been living in that you've never been on a Zoom call? But that really says something about the kind of the state of technology. And you and I live in this world where we talk a lot about how technology can be used to drive efficiency and how innovation can change legal practice. But a lot of rank and file lawyers just haven't really had to give that any serious thought until this moment. So I think that's really significant. I think it's not just that the future has arrived, but it's that lawyers' eyes are being forced open in a way that they never have been before.
And I think you've made a really important point around this perception that technology was always here threatening to automate my job away. and that it was all about productivity. And I think I know we both interviewed Richard Susskind over the last week or so.
Yeah, you're
And one of the
copying all
things,
my guests, Jack. You gotta stop that.
you have been a step ahead of me, for sure, Bob, as always. But when Richard comments about the role technology plays, he talked about productivity and automation as some table stakes, but really what it opens up is the opportunity to deliver legal services in ways they've never been delivered before. And that truly feels like the moment that's upon us with
Right.
the COVID-19 crisis is not just an opportunity, but a necessity to deliver legal services in a way they've never been delivered before. And
Right.
it feels like that's the catalyst that is finally nudging some lawyers over the precipice to actually evaluate technology.
Right. And the realization that there is no going back, and that even if there were to be a going back, we have no idea when that might be. I mean, even if you want to believe you're going to be able to go back to the way things were, which I'm sure you and I agree is not the case, but even if you want to harbor that belief, we have no idea when that day might come. I mean, when is it going to be normal again to go into your office every day and have people coming into your office and working there? So
Right.
if you don't adjust, as you say, it's a necessity. It's something you need to do now if you want to continue to practice law and make a living at it and serve your clients.
And how are you seeing? What do you think? You mentioned the fact that you don't like the term new normal, but I'll use it because it's the best I've got. But when we think about the new normal, that is whatever we emerge as, an industry and a profession at the end of this pandemic. Do you believe there will be lasting change and lasting impacts with the technology adoption and even maybe the social and the people norms that have changed? We're seeing distributed work, we're seeing work from home, we're seeing law firms run in a way that many law firms would have thought to be impossible just a month ago, realizing, well, maybe people can work from home, maybe people can get work done, in an unstructured way. Maybe we can trust people in a way that we thought we weren't able to. There will be probably many realizations the industry as a collective come to over the coming months and
Right.
maybe years as this kind of plays out. What do you think the lasting impacts will be when the pendulum starts swinging back to whatever the new normal might be?
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of permanent changes. I think the bricks and mortar law office will never be the same again. I
Mm-hmm.
think for larger firms, they're going to be looking very seriously at the footprint they occupy in physical space and cutting that back severely. I was listening to another podcast today. I was listening to Greg Lambert, who's doing a little daily podcast now called In Seclusion, and Greg mentioned on one of his shows that he's a knowledge management head of knowledge management at his
Right.
firm, and he mentioned that a number of the lawyers at his firm have already told him, we kind of like this way of working,
Right.
and we don't want to go back to the way we were working before.
And not only that, but I've heard from the client side as well that I'm getting just as good, if not better, service from my law firm. They're more responsive, and they're doing it without the need for a $1 million a year lease in downtown San Francisco or New York. When we're on the other side of this, I want this to be the new normal. I think it's a really interesting dynamic that we're seeing. The feedback both from the lawyers and the clients that this is actually a completely workable way, and it's maybe a lot more convenient to jump on a Zoom call than it is for me to drive downtown just to be bedazzled by your fancy law office with a
Right.
marble lobby and all of that.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I think ultimately that's going to be the biggest driver of the permanence of the changes that we're seeing now is going to be the client, because the clients are going to realize that more than they ever have before, that lawyers can represent them, handle their matters in a much more efficient way, and do it in ways that's much more convenient for them, and much more streamlined. And it's not the way it used to be done. It's a totally different way. I've been living in this online world for a long time now, but a lot of people haven't been. And now that once you discover it, you realize it really is a much more efficient way to get things done. I mean, I've had more face-to-face contact with people over the last couple of weeks than I had over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And that works very well for lawyer-client relationships.
And it's so much more efficient. You can have a 15-minute meeting when it makes sense to have a 15-minute meeting. Whereas I think if you travel to visit somebody, there's almost an obligation that this is going to be an hour-long meeting. And I agree with you. It really creates a bit of a different paradigm for how you meet with people.
Yeah, I would say one other thing that, and I know you just had Richard Susskind on the show, and he's the expert, he's the leading thinker on this. But I do think the courts, in some ways, are going to be more profoundly affected by this than any other segment of the legal profession, partly because the courts were the farthest behind in adopting innovations and adopting the use of technology and rethinking how they deliver their services. We can't repeat enough Richard's phrase that our courts a service or a place, and I think this has made us really understand that they are a service. That's what they are. They're not a place. There's a role for that place, but there was I sat in on a press briefing earlier this week, or not a press briefing, it was just a briefing from the Legal Services Corporation conducted on kind of the state of its attempts to serve low-income people around the country. And they had a number of guest speakers, including a Supreme Court justice, Michigan Supreme Court justice that Molly McDonough quoted in an article she wrote on Above the Law this week. But the justice said, I wrote down this quote because it's so good. She said, "This crisis might not have been the disruption we wanted, but it's the disruption we needed." So that's a Supreme Court justice saying that. And that's really true.
That's a really effective frame. And I think Richard's comment around the courts not being a place, but instead being a service is a good way of thinking about everything in the legal system. And again, your ability to deliver legal services isn't necessarily out of an office, a bricks and mortar office in the traditional sense. Yeah. And I'm curious, Bob, do you have a perspective on some trends you see happening in the industry, either on the lawyer side or on the legal tech side, that is maybe something that isn't being talked about as much, that you see as a bit of an emerging trend or something that's happening a bit below the waterline that we should be aware of and discuss?
I think something that's below the waterline is the innovation, or the sort of the pockets of innovation, I think, that are happening within the legal industry. Again, I think that when we talk about innovation, when we talk about technology adoption, we tend to think in a sort of a big picture way about it. We talk about the courts, we talk about the need to fundamentally reconfigure how the courts operate, and Richard's book has some very big thoughts about how that can be done, and there's a lot of talk about that. But there are changes being made all over the place that we just don't hear about, or innovations being made all over the place. I interviewed a judge this week for my podcast. It'll be up on Monday for my Law Next podcast. A judge named Scott Schlegel down in Louisiana, who was kind of doing some innovative and cool things with technology before all this happened, but all of this has accelerated his need to be able to. He runs a drug court primarily, so he has a lot of a population of that he serves that are people who are in danger, could be in real danger if they lose contact with the system as a result of this crisis. So he's developed a number of ways of conducting hearings speedily, of staying in touch with them. He worked with the Law Droid people to develop a bot so that he can keep in touch with the probationers.
Oh, very cool.
He worked with Dorna Moini at Documate to develop some forms that need to be done so they can easily kind of enter a guilty plea or something like that and get released from jail. And what's really cool about the way he's doing all this is he's doing it all with just totally off-the-shelf, readily available software. He's not like putting out RFPs and
Right.
waiting for 20 different companies to come in and make outrageous bids on this stuff. He's just using Slack and Zoom and Calendly to schedule court hearings.
Right.
So it's really cool the way he's doing this.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point where you can start building really innovative and really high impact solutions without issuing an RFP and doing a ground up build or something along those lines with tools like Zapier and other tools that allow you to weave together these different technologies. You can create what is essentially a bespoke solution out of off the shelf components.
Yeah. His position is I can get any court online for $500.
That's an attractive tagline, I'm sure, to a lot of courts right now. And Bob, what are you seeing on the legal technology front? As I mentioned at the start of the podcast, you're rightly and widely regarded as the reporter of record around legal tech. You've been covering legal tech for as long as I've been in legal tech. You wrote actually the first blog post about Clio way back in 2008. And you have just a really valuable vantage point in terms of what's going across the entire industry. How do you see legal tech companies responding to this crisis, and how do you see them, almost cooperating with their customers to get through this crisis together in some sense?
Well, I've been really thrilled to see the way legal tech companies have responded to this by recognizing that there are going to be a lot of legal professionals who are suddenly put into a position of having to learn how to do things in ways they haven't done them before, most particularly working from home and everything that entails. And so, dozens and dozens of legal tech companies have stepped up to the plate and extended offers ranging from free access to their services to free training and mentorship to compiling all sorts of resources to make it easy for lawyers, to legal professionals, to learn how to do this. I've got a page on my blog where I've been kind of compiling all of these free or low price discounted offers that tech companies are offering. Clio was one of the first out of the gate to do that, and I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast is well aware of the fact that you guys made a major commitment of $1 million to a disaster relief fund that is funding exactly those kinds of programs, training and access to technology and this kind of stuff as well.
And I want to point out as well, you have a resource tracking all of these offers on your blog, right. Bob, can you tell us a little bit more about that and where people can dig in? You're tracking, I think, dozens of offers at this point.
LawSitesblog.com/coronavirus-resources.
Excellent. It's a great resource, Bob, and thank you for maintaining it. I'm curious, when you think about this crisis and how you think about the state of the legal profession as we exit it, Bob, I'm wondering what you see as being the same and what is different when you compare it to previous recessions and downturns that we've been in the past. So you've been through the dot-com bust, you've been through the 2008, 2009 recession, which is actually the period we founded Clio. So I know what a downturn looks like, and there's a lot of tech founders and legal tech founders that have only seen kind of the boom times that we've been in for the last 11 years or so. And I'm curious what your perspective is on what feels the same about previous downturns, and what do you think is maybe structurally different?
Well, I think what's structurally different, what's structurally different in terms of the legal technology sector is that the legal technology sector is a much more expansive sector right now than it was the last time we went through a
Right.
downturn like this. There is a lot more competition. There are a lot more companies in the space. So, I do think that this might be the result of this on the legal technology sector is that we're going to see some corrections going on in the market. Where there are going to be some companies that are going to shut down because of this, and there are others that are going to be that are really going to find their place in their niche more so than they ever have before. I think that's the biggest difference. I think the other it's not a tech issue so much, but what I think the similarity is, what I most worry about is the impact of this on that justice gap that we all talk about. You talk about it. You talked about it in your book. We all are concerned about it. But what happened after the last recession was that there was a serious decline in funding for legal services to serve the poor, at least in the United States.
Yeah.
And part of that was driven by the fact that so much of legal services in the United States is funded through IOLTA funds. And when there is a recession and the market goes down, then IOLTA suffers mightily, and there's less money to fund legal services. And over the last few years, IOLTA has finally been recovering, and there has been more money going to fund legal services. And I really worry that's going to change. I think next year we're going to see a significant drop in IOLTA funds, and that's going to mean a significant drop in funding for legal services. And that the tech side of that is that a lot of these legal services agencies have not been well equipped with tech to begin with.
Right.
Right now, we're in a situation where legal services agencies are having to make the same adjustments we all are of working from home and of serving clients who are working from home, if they're working at all. And they don't have the technology to do that. They're not as well prepared as a larger law firm is, say, or a lot of law firms would be. So I think there's going to be a real need for the technology community to respond in ways that help the legal services community fill what's going to be, I think, a real gap over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and a funding shortfall coupled with what will no doubt be an unprecedented level of demand for those legal services.
Yeah, demand and a population that is really at a real disadvantage in this situation, where if they rely on public transportation, they can't rely on public transportation to get to see a lawyer or whatever. If they live in a rural area and if they're not tech savvy, or if their lawyers don't have access to video conferencing or whatever, not that it would be hard to get access, but again, for a lot of lawyers and legal providers, they're just getting up to speed on how to do that, how to serve clients in that way. So I'd be concerned about that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I share your concern on the technology front, and it's actually one of the areas we at Clio are starting to turn our attention to as well, in terms of how can we support that urgent need happening on the pro bono side. We actually recently collaborated with the New York State Bar Association along with Paladin in terms of equipping the Bar Association to respond to what will be an unbelievable amount of demand around unemployment insurance and legal representation around that. And I do hope that legal technology providers can have a huge impact in helping bridge that divide. And when we pop up a level and think about the overall access to justice gap above and beyond pro bono related access, do you think we'll look back on this pandemic as the catalyzing factor that helped increase access to justice? Do you think we'll see the lasting change be that we see a structural change in the cost structure for the average law firm, that we see maybe some of these expensive leases and and other aspects of the overhead of running a law firm start to go away and make legal services more affordable to the average consumer?
That's the silver lining here. It really is, and it's true of law firms. I mean, law firms now that law firms have learned in a matter of weeks how to deliver their services virtually, they are going to be forever enabled to deliver their services virtually. And now that courts are learning to deliver their services, to deliver justice, to hold hearings in a virtual way, there's no going back from that. So the long-term impact, even the short-term impact of this is going to be increased access to justice. Again, there is always I keep coming back. There's it depends where you're talking, and there among the lower income people there is still the concern, the issue of the digital divide. I mean, if you don't have reliable access to broadband, if you're not savvy in how to use the internet, the fact that your lawyer now suddenly figured it out doesn't do you a lot of good.
Right.
So there's a societal issue there that needs to be addressed in terms of serving lower income people. But overall, this is definitely going to make a major change, I think, in closing that justice gap, access to justice gap.
Bob, you've recently written a bit of a retrospective on the last decade in legal and legal tech. And I don't think this pandemic is necessarily what anyone had in mind for how we'd be kicking off the 2020s and the next decade of legal innovation. I'm curious, what are some of your perspectives on what this new decade might look like? And maybe one where we actually see 20 years of innovation compressed into 10 or even less. It's going to be, I think, a really exciting decade for all of us. What are some of your bold predictions about what the next 10 years might look like?
Well, a lot of what I've already said, I think the boldest, and I'm sure I haven't had a chance to listen to your interview with Susskind yet, but I'm sure Susskind said this much better than I could. But I think the boldest is that the court systems are going to fundamentally change going forward, and that our idea of how courts deliver justice, what justice looks like, what it means, is going to be radically different going forward. I think courts have been stuck in what is largely 19th century
right.
Vision of what it is they're supposed to do. And again, Susskind can say this far better than I do, but this is a system that's been created by lawyers for lawyers, and it was never designed for consumers from the get-go. And going forward, it's going to be a much more consumer-focused system, and it's going to have to be if it's going to continue to fulfill the important role it plays in our society. I think, and I do think that law practice is going to be forever changed. I mean, I think this is a real opportunity. I'm a great believer in the idea that out of adversity comes opportunity. And I can tell you, just in my own career, I've had that happen any number of times where something, something doesn't go the way you wanted it to go. And then you realize that maybe that was a good thing. It's
right.
A different direction. And I think right now lawyers have an opportunity to experiment. There are no rules going forward right now. This is, again, going to go back to new normal. The normal hasn't been defined yet. This is all new, and this is an opportunity for lawyers to try different things. It's an opportunity to even be a little dumb, or act, reveal that you're a little dumb about some things. That Zoom call I talked about, where some of these lawyers had never been on Zoom before.
Right.
They weren't making a secret of it, and they couple did some goofy things on the call, like the one who kept sharing his screen repeatedly, not figuring out how he was doing. But now he knows, and the next time he's going to know how to use that. So I think all of these things are going to make major structural changes. Exactly what those changes look like, I don't know. It's going to be less physical. Law practice is going to be less physical. I mean, it goes without saying, and I don't think we've once mentioned the cloud in this call, but I mean, something else that you and I have both talked about for years is the fact that the practice of law is moving to the cloud. In a lot of ways, I tend to accept that as a given, as the state of affairs, and then I realize how many lawyers are still struggling with that concept. And
Right.
so, again, going forward, that's no longer a point of discussion or concern. Going forward, that is going to be the status quo.
I think you made a really interesting observation there too. Maybe the opportunity for lawyers to be vulnerable about their technology know-how, and again, asking for help out of necessity. Again, if I want my law firm to survive, I need to figure out Zoom. I need to figure out the cloud. I need to figure out how to collaborate with my clients over the internet. And there's lots of people willing to help, and an opportunity maybe to get over that pride and ego in some cases, and just reach out and be vulnerable about the fact that you need help. And there are plenty of people, I think, that are willing to help.
Yeah, we're all learning right now. We're all learning how to adjust to this situation.
So one of the places you've been writing over the last couple of years, Bob, is this evolving state of ethics, opinions, and state bar positions on technological competence and its role in that particular state. You've been tracking which states look at technological competence as part of your professional obligations as a lawyer. And you'll be hosting a webinar, just as a teaser, with Joshua Lenon, Clio's Lawyer in Residence, in June on this very topic. And maybe to set the stage for that discussion, which I'm really looking forward to, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the, number one, give us the 10,000-foot view of the evolving role of technological competence in these state bar and even national level rules of professional conduct, and how do you see that evolving due to the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, well, way back in 2012, the American Bar Association amended the rule of professional responsibility that governs, that pertains to the competence of a lawyer, to essentially say that the obligation of a lawyer is not just to be competent in the law, in the practice of law, but also in the technology that's relevant to that practice.
Ironically, wasn't that the 2020 Vision
right.
committee
that's
that
right. That's right. Now
that came up with that?
That's right. The ABA Commission on Ethics 2020 had recommended that. I think their recommendation came out in like 2009 or something, and then it was adopted by the ABA. Some of them were adopted by the ABA in 2012. Of course, in the United States, what the ABA does are model rules, and it doesn't apply until the states adopt them. But I think we're up to 36, 38. I forget off the top of my head, states that have now adopted that. What was put into the model rule is pretty vague, and it doesn't give a lot of guidance. But I think we're beginning to understand that what this means is that a lawyer really does have to have a fair understanding of not just the technology that they use in their own practice, not just their billing software or Clio or whatever else, but they need to have an understanding of the technology that their clients are using and how that might impact the matter that you're handling for that client. This really becomes critical right now because as we are all adapting to this current situation, we are all clients and lawyers beginning to use technologies that some of us are not used to. And that means there is a greater risk perhaps than ever of exposing client confidences, exposing client data, So that places an obligation on lawyers to understand how to protect data and understand how data can be protected and what are the tools available and how can that be done. My feeling is I still maintain that most lawyers do not get this at all, really don't have a good sense of how to protect the client privileges when they're communicating with clients via data. Back in the days when I used to go to conferences, I don't do that anymore, but I used to go to conferences.
Good old days.
Good old days. And I would speak to groups of lawyers, and I would almost always ask, how many in this room know how to encrypt an email? And if 4 or 5 hands went up, that would be a good day. I mean, lawyers.
One hand would be surprising for
one
me.
One hand, I suppose. Well, there's always one in every crowd. And yet, one of the leading ABA opinion to have addressed this issue essentially says that in most cases, lawyers should be considering the use of encryption, and that in every case, a lawyer should be consulting with the client about how to protect communications, how to protect data, and what are the best ways to ensure that the data is secure. So, I mean, all of that is a long-winded way of saying this ethical duty is something that I think a lot of lawyers don't understand the scope of, haven't really thought through, and probably aren't prepared for. And the situation we're in right now creates a greater than ever danger that there is going to be a breach of that duty, because there is going to be a breach, a data breach of some kind, because of a lawyer's ignorance about how to protect data. So, not good news, but I one of the you've got your support staff showing up there. A different support staff than the last time I was on a video call with you, I think.
My son Ian making a guest appearance.
I lost my train of thought, but I made my point. I mean, it's a critical. Well, I know what I wanted to say.
You're commenting on the risk of data breaches.
Yeah, right. I guess the other thing I want to say is just that if you look at some of the ethics opinions that have come out on this, and there was just one that just came out. I wrote about it on my blog just last week. A great one from Pennsylvania, specifically written to address ethics requirements in the age of working from home. They all talk about the fact that, if you are not savvy about technology, if you don't have a high degree of competence in technology, it's okay to bring in help, to hire a consultant or get right. Somebody who you can consult with. But what these ethics opinions also all say is that you, as the lawyer in the case, never lose the responsibility, the overall responsibility to manage that case and to manage the technological issues as well as the legal issues. And if you're a lawyer who doesn't have at least a basic understanding of data security and how that can be protected, then even if you bring in an outside expert, you're not going to have the knowledge you need to manage that expert.
Right.
So I think this is a real opportunity. Again, once again, it's an opportunity for lawyers to really get up to speed on the communication technologies that they are using and how they can be used in a way that best protects their clients.
I think that I want to underscore the last point you made, Bob, because I think it's so important in the cases where so many firms are in this emergency, almost evacuation-like way, moving from on-premise and moving from bricks and mortar law offices to a fully distributed world and a cloud-based world. You're changing things so radically that you need to ensure that you're thinking about the data residency and data privacy in a really rigorous way, and realize that the surface area for risk around your data is increasing when you're more than moving to the cloud. I would say moving to a distributed work from home environment. All of a sudden your endpoints are in a completely new environment and subject to a new set of risks.
Right. I mean, the bottom line is that the ethical responsibilities around working from home are absolutely no different than the ethical responsibilities around working from an office. It doesn't, right. or from Starbucks or wherever else. So you just need to be aware of them, and you need to be cognizant of them and how they apply to the environment you're working in and the environment your clients are working in.
So, Bob, I've really enjoyed my conversation. My parting question for you is what your main message to others is as legal professionals or as human beings that you'd like to part with.
My mother always used to say, and probably everybody's mother always used to say, "This too shall pass." I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. But I go back to what I said before, which is that out of adversity comes opportunity. That's been a real mantra in my own life. And I think we can all, it's going to be a hard time for a lot of us. A lot of us are going to lose loved ones. Some of us are going to lose our jobs, or lose our incomes. But I think there are a lot of opportunities here for those who look for them and those who build around them. And I think a lot of us, and I think the profession overall is going to come out in a better place after this is over.
Agree. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, as you put it, the silver lining in all of this.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Bob. Really enjoyed being on this side of the microphone with you for once. You've got so much perspective and wisdom to share. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Hey, you're a pretty good interviewer, Jack. You should You should give up your day job and just do this.
I am doing exactly that for an hour a day right now,
Okay.
and I've actually really enjoyed it. And once again, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters today, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Bolin, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com.